Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let us continue with our tafsir of Surah An-Nisaa. بحول الله وقوته. We are on ayah number 10. قال الله تعالى إن الذين يأكلون أموال اليتامى ظلما إنما يأكلون في بطونهم نارا وسيصلون سعيرا. He says, indeed, those who يأكلون, meaning eat, but what is referred to here is consume. So even, for example, wearing the clothes of the orphan, that is haram, even though it is not eating. But he uses the word eating because it is what most often happens. Amwal al-yatama, the wealth of the orphans. We spoke about the word yatim before. Dhulman, meaning out of oppression. Dhulman is mansub bil-fatha because it is a hal, meaning they consume the orphan's wealth in the state of these people being zalimin, as oppressors. It is also said it is mansub bil-fatha because it is a maf'ul li-ajlihi, meaning the reason why they consume the wealth of the orphan is out of oppression and not because of a valid need. So this restriction, dhulm, is necessary because we said before that it is permissible for a poor person who is looking after the orphan and the wealth of the orphan, it is permissible for such a person to consume on a reasonable basis. So these people who consume out of oppression are in fact consuming fire into their butun, plural of batan, meaning belly. So this is a threat that they will be entering Jahannam. وَسَيَصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. They say صَلِيَ النَّارَ, meaning to suffer its heat. So they will suffer the heat of Jahannam. Okay, so reflecting on this ayah, we take it is a major sin to unlawfully consume the wealth of the orphan. Consuming anyone's wealth unlawfully, of course, is haram, but especially the orphan who is unable to stand up for his or her rights and defend him or herself. So they are even more vulnerable. We take that the fire is real and certain people will enter it, those who have not repented from their sins, nor have they been forgiven for their sins, nor have they suffered their punishment in this world or before entering Jahannam. So such people who have any outstanding sins would have to pay for them in the fire of Jahannam. And we also take, like we have been taking from the previous ayat, the most compassionate nature of Allah Jalla wa Ala, His mercy, His pity on those who are vulnerable in society. Let's look at ayah number 11. يوصيكم الله في أولادكم للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين فإن كن نساء فوق اثنتين فلهن ثلثا ما ترك وإن كانت واحدة فلها النصف ولأبويه لكل واحد منهما السدس مما ترك إن كان له ولد فإن لم يكن له ولد وورثه أبواه فلأمه الثلث فإن كان له إخوة فلأمه السدس من بعد وصية يوصى بها أو دين آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا فريضة من الله إن الله كان عليما حكيما. Before going into the words of this ayah, let's just mention straight up that in order to be well grounded in inheritance matters, you have to learn via a whiteboard and pen or its electronic alternative, because the matter of inheritance is only ever properly studied when you draw tables of particular cases and you solve the inheritance problem that way, making a table of who the inheritors are, what fraction they receive, and then finding the common denominator of the fractions, and then after that working out the share, or if you like, the proportion of wealth which goes to each inheritor. This is done using a table. It is not possible to make a table in an audio presentation, rather that requires a video presentation. So having got that out of the way, we may say that understanding the tafsir of this ayah of inheritance will give you a good idea of inheritance, but it will not make you well grounded in inheritance, so notice the difference. As for the ayah itself, let's take the word yusikumullah from awsa yusi, isa'an. We have spoken about this before. It is to give an order about an important matter, a matter with some weight to it. This is linguistically what it means. In the fiqhi sense, when we talk about a wasiyah, it is when a person orders someone else to act on his behalf after his death. So basically it is wakala after death. So he's saying Allah gives you the order fi awladikum, regarding your children. So this will be your sons and your daughters, and also the children down the male line. So the children of your son, and the children of your son's son, and the children of your son's son's son, and so on. As for the children of your daughter, then they are not your children. Technically, they are the children of their father, even though they are biologically your children or your grandchildren. He's saying that the male will have twice the female. So in other words, the son has twice the daughter. We should add here that this is on the condition that they are full brothers and sisters, because in the matters of inheritance, we have three types of siblings. We have full siblings, then we have the uterine siblings, who are siblings sharing the same mother and not the same father, and we also have what we might call the consanguine siblings, who are siblings who share the same father but not the same mother. And all three different types of siblings have different rules regarding the inheritance. Now, what we have just said applies to siblings. So if you die, you could leave behind siblings. They could be your full siblings, they could be your uterine siblings, so they share your same mother but not the father, or they could be your consanguine siblings, in which case they share your same father but not the same mother. However, this matter applies to siblings. The ayah begins by talking about not siblings but children. So as for children, it is much clearer and simpler. Your son, if you were to pass away, would receive twice the share of your daughter. Then he says, but if they are nisa, meaning women, above 2, then they will have falahunna thulutha, 2/3 ma tarak, 2/3 of what he has left, meaning what the deceased has left. So the ayah says above 2. However, we know from the authentic narration that this ayah means 2 or more, because above 2 means 3 or more. And this is not the intended meaning. The intended meaning is 2 or more, and this is where the ahadith are absolutely vital to understanding the jurisprudence of Islam. We have the hadith of Sa'd ibn Rabi', who was slain in the Battle of Uhud, one of the 70 companions who were slain. He left behind 2 daughters and a wife. However, as was the practice of the Jahiliyyah, the uncle of the 2 daughters, so this would be the brother of Sa'd, he came and took all the inheritance of Sa'd, and the wife of Sa'd came and complained to the Prophet, saying that they need money, they will not be married until they have money. And then the Prophet ﷺ did not have the answer, so he left Allah Jalla wa Ala to decide the matter, and this ayah came down. And so after the Prophet gave the decision, he told the uncle of the 2 daughters, أعطي ابنتي سعد الثلثين, give the 2 daughters of Sa'd 2/3, وأمهما الثمن, and their mother give them 1/8 of the inheritance, وما بقي فهو لك, and whatever remains after that, then it is for you. So notice in this case there were 2 daughters and they received 2/3. So it means the ayah intends that if there are 2 or more daughters. And then besides, ayah 176 of the same surah makes it clear that it is indeed 2 daughters. It does not say فوق اثنتين. It just uses the word 2. If one asks, why does the son receive double the share? At least one reason is because the males have a financial obligation and a financial burden on them much more than that of the females. This is one good reason. However, ultimately it's because Allah Jalla wa Ala said so, and He knows best about us. And this is enough of a reason for us to accept. And then He says, if she is just one, meaning just one daughter by herself, she does not have any other sisters, then the ayah says she will have a nisf, which means a half. So up to now, He has been talking about the children. Then He turns His attention to the parents. He says, wali abawayhi, and for both his parents, each one has a sudus, meaning a sixth from what he has left behind, and this is on the condition that the deceased person has also left behind a child, meaning a son or a daughter. And remember, when we say children, we mean your son or a daughter, or the son or a daughter of your son, or the son or a daughter of your son's son, and going down in that line. These are all your children. So if that's the case, then both the mother and the father receive a sixth. It's just that with the daughter and the father will take a sixth, but the father will also be entitled to any remainder after the fractions have been given to their rightful recipients. This is not mentioned in this ayah, but it is mentioned in an authentic hadith. Okay, what about if the deceased does not have any children who will inherit from him? Then in that case, Allah tells us that the mother will have a third. And the reason why He says the mother will have a third is because He intends thereby that the father will have the 2/3. So the father and mother will inherit 2 to 1. Same as the case with the deceased's son and daughter. Note that this part of the ayah gives the sense that the deceased leaves behind no children and leaves behind only a mother and a father. Because it says, وَوَرِثَهُ أَبَوَاهُ, and his parents inherit from him. As if to say only the parents are inheriting from him. And we say the same thing if the deceased does not have any children but leaves behind 2 parents, but also leaves behind a spouse. So that's a husband or a wife. The husband and the wife will take their share, and then from what remains, the mother takes a third and the father takes 2/3. This was an inheritance matter judged by Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu an, and therefore we call it the Umuriyah, the one pertaining to Umar. So there are 2 cases of this. The deceased leaves behind a mother and a father and a wife, if it's a male deceased, and if it's a female deceased, she leaves behind a mother, father, and a husband. These 2 cases are called the Umuriyatan. Then he says that if he, meaning the deceased, has ikhwa, meaning siblings, then the mother receives a sixth. What is apparent from this ayah is exactly what it says. Any sibling of the deceased will reduce the mother's share to a sixth. Now this is regardless of whether these siblings inherit or do not inherit. How can the siblings not inherit? Because the father blocks off the siblings from inheriting. So if, let's say, we have 5 brothers of the deceased, all of these 5 brothers will be blocked off by the father. The ayah says that if there are, let's say, 5 brothers, they will reduce the mother's share to a sixth, even if they are blocked off. This is what is apparent from the ayah. However, there is another opinion which says that if the brothers are blocked off by the father, then they will not block off the mother and reduce her share to a sixth, because the person who is blocked off cannot himself block others off. And so this is a debatable situation. Let us leave the debate for the time being, but we'll just make mention of it because it is a hot topic, and the difference of opinion is strong and both sides are well argued. Then he says, min ba'di wasiyatin, after the wasiyah, yusa biha awdain, after the wasiyah which has been given by the deceased, awdain, or the debt. So this means to say that if the deceased has told his wakil or his wasi, which is the technical term for the wakil after your death, give a certain portion of my wealth, which has to be a third or less, to such and such a charity. That needs to be done first before we talk about any inheritance. Also, if the deceased has any debts to be paid off, then they need to be paid off first before we talk about any inheritance. There are other matters as well, such as funeral costs. They need to be covered from the wealth of the deceased before we speak about inheritance as well. So inheritance money pretty much takes the back seat when compared with the rest of the obligations. He mentions wasiyah first before the debt, and this is because with the wasiyah there is no one who's going to come knocking on your door claiming his or her money, whereas with a debt you will have your creditor knocking on your door demanding the debt. And so the wasiyah takes priority in this case because you do not have anyone demanding it, and so it's easy to forget. This is why Allah Jalla wa Ala makes mention of it first, so that you do not forget to implement the wasiyah. Then he says, your fathers and your sons. You do not know, la tadruna, from adra yudri idra'an, to know of something. You do not know which of them is closer in benefit to you. So this means to say that you do not know which of your family members would bring about more of a benefit to you, because Allah Jalla wa Ala has this level of knowledge. So if Allah Jalla wa Ala knows better than you about your own family, then it would surely stand to reason that Allah would know better how to divide the inheritance shares, and that these matters should not be left down to the whims and fancies of people. So these inheritance shares are to cut off any argumentation as to who should receive what. The word naf'an is mansub bil fatha because it is a tamyiz of the word aqrab, nearest. So nearest to you in which way? In benefit. It is a tamyiz, it distinguishes the meaning. Then he says faridatan min Allah. Farida, meaning here it is a fard. It is mansub bil fatha. They say it is because it is a maf'ulun mutlaq. It is there to emphasize the rulings which have preceded, that these rulings are a farida of Allah. They are an obligation sent down from Allah Jalla wa Ala. He says, indeed Allah is aliman, He has the most knowledge about His creation, and hakiman, He is most wise in all that which He decrees, including the inheritance laws. Notice how he also says kana, which means was. It does not actually mean was in the past tense. What it really means is that he was always and always is aliman hakima. Reflecting on this ayah, we take that Allah Jalla wa Ala cares about our financial situation, and He does not want us to get into argumentation and disputes, and for this reason He lays down the detailed ruling on inheritance. We also notice the eloquent style in speech where Allah Jalla wa Ala says mithlu hadd al-unthayayn, the share of two females. He does not say the female receives half of the male, even though mathematically it is equivalent. But if he says the female receives half of the male, then it sounds like the female is being shortchanged, whereas that's not the case. The female is receiving what she deserves, but it's just that the male is receiving more so. So the style of speech matters. To illustrate this point, people often give a little story. Whether it's true or not, it does not matter, because the lesson from the story matters. It says that a king had a dream that his teeth were falling off. He called for a dream interpreter. So a dream interpreter came, and he said that the dream means that your siblings and your family is going to die. And this interpretation induced much fear and anxiety in the king, and the king ordered that the dream interpreter be flogged. And he called for another dream interpreter. The second dream interpreter came, and he said that this dream means that you will live longer than your siblings and your family. And this interpretation pleased the king, and the king granted this interpreter a prize. So this is the little story. Now what do we notice? both the dream interpreters essentially said the same thing, but it's the style of language which is used which produced different results entirely. So the point being that the style of speech matters. And this is a great point that Shaykh Muhammad ibn al-Uthaymin points out in his tafsir. We also take that the inheritance applies to all the wealth which the deceased leaves behind, not just the money in his bank account, but everything which he leaves behind, even rights and intellectual property. We also need to talk about a vital point. We do not take this point from the ayah per se, nevertheless it is absolutely vital for the inheritance, and this is to say, even though the ayah is general, speaking about the inheritance of your children, we need to add restrictions. We take these restrictions from the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, which is to say that the servant and the intentional murderer and the kafir does not inherit from the Muslim. So for example, if you die and leave behind children who are kuffar, they will not inherit your wealth. Likewise, if they are a servant, they will not inherit your wealth. Likewise, if they murdered you intentionally, then they will not inherit your wealth because they are suspected of murdering you in order to take your wealth. And so we punish them by depriving them of what they wanted. So based on this, we said that the son takes twice the share of his full sister. Okay, that is true, but what if his full sister is a kafira? Then he takes the whole share. It's not in the ratio of 1 to 2. He just simply takes the whole share, and the sister is treated as being not present. And the same way vice versa. If the son is a kafir, then the son does not inherit with the sister 2 to 1. Rather, the son is treated as if he did not even exist. And then the daughter is treated as if she was just alone. The ayah spoke about the parents receiving a sixth. Okay, but if your parents are both kuffar, they receive literally nothing. And the inheritance goes to the Muslim relatives of yours. So this is a vital distinction to be made because the ayah is general. One might think, reading the ayah, that even kuffar parents inherit from you, or maybe your kuffar children inherit from you, or maybe if they are servants, or if they intentionally murdered the deceased, that they inherit from him or her, and that is simply not the case. Another vital point to note is that for the inheritance to take effect, we need to have knowledge that the inheritor was alive after the death of the deceased. This is important because if two family members die at the same time, none of them inherit from each other. Or perhaps two or more family members die and we do not know who died first. It's all unknown. It could be, let's say, a car crash or a plane crash or something along that line, and we do not know who died first. So nobody inherits, because the condition is we need to know positively that the inheritor was alive after the death of the deceased. We also take from this ayah, in addition to the detailed rules of the inheritance fractions, that Allah Jalla wa Ala gives much concern and care to fulfilling the bequests of people, that is the wasiyah, and also in paying off the debts of people. Initially, the Prophet would not even pray on those Muslims, the Salat al-Janazah, when they had not paid off their debts. So the matter is most serious. Notice that the ayah says that if the deceased has ikhwa, which is siblings, then the mother receives the sixth. Ikhwa is a plural, which means two or more, which then means if the deceased has just one sibling, then that sibling does not reduce the mother's share to a sixth, and that the mother would be entitled to a third if the other conditions are met. So if the deceased, let's say, leaves behind one sister or one brother, then the mother is still entitled to a third. But if the deceased leaves behind two sisters or two brothers, or one sister and one brother, then the mother's share would be a sixth. This is in opposition to the son or daughter. If the deceased leaves behind a son or a daughter who is going to inherit, then the mother's share will drop to 1/6. We also take from this ayah that Allah has in-depth knowledge and we only have a slight amount of knowledge. We're just scratching the surface. So if that's the case, then it is upon us to submit to the laws of Allah Jalla wa'ala, because He is better knowing. And from our submission is to submit to the laws of the inheritance fractions. We also take that these fractions given in the ayah are not a recommendation, they are an obligation, because the word faridah is used. We also take the two names of Allah, Alim and Hakim, with their corresponding attributes, which are fitting to the divine nature of Allah Jalla wa'ala Himself. هذا والله أعلم.